This is Chip Maxwell, and you're listening to the Retire Smart Podcast with David Brooks. Today, David and Chip unpack growing concerns over the Federal Reserve's expanding role, questioning its dual mandate, ballooning balance sheet, and politically influenced interest rate decisions. They also spotlight Nvidia's historic dominance in the S&P 500 and discuss Trump's wavering stance on trade policy and what all this means for investors and business leaders alike. Well, David, we've got a new guest joining us in the second segment today, so I'll just touch on it quickly now, but this is really exciting. We're going to be partnering with Teammates. Des Moines Adams, the CEO of Teammates, is going to join us for some events to promote recruiting of mentors. There's a tremendous need. Just give us a quick thumbnail, prime the pump for the second segment.
Oh, I'm really excited to have Des Moines join us. We signed we've been partnering, and financially we've been supporting Teammates every year, but this year we stepped up. We're now the primary sponsor of their golf tournament annually. They're a great organization, and the need is real. They're lacking about 1,100 mentors needed right now just between Omaha and Lincoln. So we said, well, how can we help? And he said, spread the word. So, hey, we're having them on, and we're going to host not one, but two recruiting events on how simple it is to be a mentor. And folks, you want to pay attention to this because it's a great way to give back to the community, and it's less than an hour a week of your time, and you really can make a massive difference in a young man or woman's life. So anyway, I'm really excited for the segment.
Stay tuned for more details and to get Des Moines' story of how he ended up at Nebraska as a black shirt, and then how he ended up getting involved in Teammates. That's coming up in the second segment. But in the meantime, David, as always, a lot of news to get to. Now, I don't have a story to put in front of you, but as we sit down to record this show in the middle of the week, there's news all over the place about Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent calling on the Federal Reserve to do an internal audit, an internal investigation. He's saying you're exceeding your mandate, mission creep, they sometimes call it in politics or in the military. But what I haven't heard or seen is what is or are the specific concerns. Where does Bessent think the Federal Reserve has gone too far?
Well, they are doing climate studies. What does that have to do with their mandate? They were mandated and brought in for one purpose, and that was to simply manage our currency using monetary policy to help us stimulate growth when we need it or curb growth when the economy would get overheated, to keep us from having crashes, etc. So then we added, many, many decades later, a second mandate of full employment. So they have what we call a dual mandate. Basically, when unemployment's below 4%, that's considered full employment in American society. So we're pretty close to that now, 4.1, 4.2. And then they move interest rates. Now, they have changed the language on how they slow down the spigot. In other words, if they make interest rates cheaper, capital's looser, easier to get, which means it's easier to expand the economy. Businesses like ours can invest capital faster. We can get access to cash to expand if we want to, right? Businesses can invest, so you grow the economy. They raise interest rates to slow that down. Now, a secondary factor is inflation will come if growth gets too hot or if there's too much money in the system for the amount of products that are being produced. And so therefore they've massaged their language saying, oh, we control inflation with interest rates, which is nonsense, right? Inflation is controlled by one thing, M2, money supply. We talk about it over and over. In fact, I sent a chart to you when you asked me to talk about this briefly, and this is from the Federal Reserve. This is their chart. Now, Brian Westbury, the economist, a famed economist of First Trust, who we quote often here, this is his handwriting on the chart, and he was the one that put this out on X or Twitter. And look, if the Fed can control interest rates when interest rates are low, we would basically have inflation. If you lower interest rates according to them and you hold them down artificially low, then inflation takes off. Well, as you can see on the chart, we went about 7-8 years with 0% interest rates, basically. There's no inflation. We had zero interest rates again after COVID hit, and we had massive inflation. What is the difference? Well, they printed money, right? It's money supply.
Okay.
So what Scott Bessent is complaining about is they're trying to manipulate the public with this idea that they're mandating inflation when that is not what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to help the economy grow, which means making interest rates easier, money looser when you want to accelerate growth. Well, we are not growing in leaps and bounds, but unemployment is down. Therefore, by their mandate, they should be lowering interest rates, right?
So you're saying these interest rate decisions have been more shall we say, political rather than
100%.
economic.
And this has gone on now for a couple of decades. This is not new to Powell. This was Yellen before him and Greenspan and Bernanke. It doesn't matter. They've all been very political the last 20 or 30 years with the Fed. The reality is they can't control the economy. They control short-term interest rates, which does have some ancillary effects on the economy. But if they are data dependent, which they keep saying in speeches, well, then you would lower interest rates based on the data and based on what you did by precedent last September, cutting 50 basis points when inflation was 45% higher than it is today. Anyway, so on top of that mission creep, we have over 650 employees at the Fed. What for? What do they do? And here's the thing that I want to ask. How are they paying the bills? How are they keeping the lights on there, Chip? They used to run what's called a scarcity model. They would keep around $700 billion in capital reserves, 507, and banks would come, deposit overnight to shore up their balance sheets. They had to do every night. It was just a window. And the banks would pay the Fed interest. They flipped the script about 15 years ago and now do this abundance model. And now we pay the banks interest to deposit money at the Fed, and we're sitting with a $7 trillion plus balance sheet. We're losing $100 billion a year the Fed is losing. Where are they getting the money to pay their bills? How are they paying those salaries?
You know, it's
now you
not,
get me started on a rant here.
How do you really feel? It's not, strictly speaking, a federal government agency, but maybe there's some way that we could sick Doge
their website
on the
is
Fed.
GOV. Their emails are all government emails.
Oh, is that right?
So, there's some debate on this. And another economist that we do, a macroeconomist.
I think there's a pretext there. We could send Doge
Danielle,
after him.
Martino Booth. We quote her often
before,
as well. She says the Fed are really actually our government employees.
Yeah.
And she actually worked for the Fed, just so you know. That was her previous career.
Well,
but
let's
anyway,
get Doge after him.
Yeah, exactly that. And so I think the American public absolutely wants the Fed audited and stream back down. Now, they can serve a purpose, but, anyway, we can get into a whole conspiracy theory on global banks around the world, the Rothschilds, et cetera. But yeah, it's definitely something that needs to be looked into and quick. And so Bessent is selling the right message, I believe.
All right, let's shift gears to the markets, David. The S&P roaring and soaring. And you sent the team a chart showing that Nvidia has now hit market cap territory that hasn't been reached since, am I reading this right? IBM back in 1969 as far as dominance of the S&P?
Yeah, so Nvidia went past $4 trillion about 2 weeks ago, right? $4 trillion in market cap. And so, you know me, I get up at 4 a.m. and start doing some data hounding, and I have access to a lot of data. And so I went back in the archives here, and I was like, it crossed over 8% of the S&P 500. One stock was 8% of the weighting of the 500 stock index, right? That's happened twice in history. And exactly, you got to go all the way back to 1969. Chip, I was one. I was 1 year old baby. And AT&T, right? Ma Bell was 8% of the market. And then you got to go all the way back prior to that to 1949 when the other case, right, that happened. And in both cases, the federal government sued those companies to break them up. IBM one and AT&T was the other, right? The two examples. They were successful in breaking up AT&T, the Ma Bell breakup, but that didn't happen for almost 20 years. 1984, I believe, was the breakup, right?
Yeah.
They sued IBM. They lost that case, but it took 27 years to put that court case to rest.
I think AT&T was the one back in 49 and finally accomplished in 84 the breakup. IBM, as you say, never was. Well, in your chart shows how IBM dominated in the 70s and the 80s.
Yeah, and they were the early winners, obviously, in the computer age, et cetera, right? But the point being is stocks can't stay up in this lofty territory forever. Again, NVIDIA's a great company. We have a lot of clients that own this and portfolios, et cetera. I'm just saying this is definitely a word of caution when something gets this far out over its skis, so to speak, is a phrase I sometimes use, cautionary tale. It could pull back severely pretty quickly.
The president says, well, here's the Fox Business headline. Trump absolutely going to renegotiate USMCA. That's United States, Mexico, Canada. That was the big trade deal he did during his first term as president. I thought the USMCA was a Trump success, but apparently he thinks it needs an update, an upgrade.
And this is where I get upset with Trump, right? And because people know I voted for him, I talked about it. But listen, you got to lay out the playing field for business owners to understand what's the rules of the game. I have no problem if you're going to put tariffs on any country. but you can't keep doing this flip-flop or taco, right? Trump always chickens out. And as we came in the studio this morning, Bess had actually announced, well, the August 1st deadline for China, no, that's August 12th now. So they just chickened out once again,
okay.
right? And there's another acronym going out there, FAFO, and we're not going to say what that means on the air, but
fool
that's
around and find out.
Fool around and find out. There we go. Fool around and find out. Yeah. But if that were the case, if they hold the line, we'll see. But I don't care if there's tariffs or not. Take the tariff revenue and replace it with, take away income tax that you're charging the lowest income people in our country. That was the deal that he campaigned on. And I don't think anybody have a problem with it. But the problem is the media doesn't report anything accurately. And he does. He's flip-flopping a little bit here too much. Do it behind the scenes in the boardroom. Flip-flop all you want, but put a unified message out so that CEOs need to understand how much they can spend, what they want to borrow, if they want to expand, if they want to cut jobs. But right now, most CEOs surveyed are a little nervous, Chip.
Thank you for listening to the Retire Smart podcast with David Brooks. If you want to learn how to generate lifetime income, reduce your tax bill, and maintain your lifestyle in retirement, visit retiresmartpodcast.com. And make sure to subscribe to keep up with new episodes every week.